Welcome to episode number 1 of an Exploring Equestrian Disciplines podcast. Today, we're going to be going over the art of the horse. If you are ever around horses, it is important to understand the parts of their body to not only keep yourself safe, but also understand if they are in pain or something is wrong with them. If you do get more involved in horses, it is also important to know their parts to help prevent injury while training and riding. Horses have 205 bones and about 700 muscles that work together simultaneously to allow horses to achieve the amazing, such as jumping over large jumps, turning barrels at high speeds, and much, much more. Later in the podcast, we will also be touching on certain parts of horses, how they can vary, and how that helps a horse in each discipline. To get us started, let's split the horse into 3 sections: the head and neck, the body, and the legs. I'm going to be going over the most popular terms and parts and some of the corresponding muscles and bones associated with them. To make this easy, I'm going to start from top to bottom. So I'm going to start with the head, and first up is ears. Horses' ears are very, very flexible, and it is how they communicate with not only other horses, but also humans and other animals. A horse may pin his ears back if he's fearful or angry at you, or they may be swiveling in all different directions if the horse is listening. The poll is behind a horse's ears and is where a bridle sits. Some Western bridles even work by putting pressure on the poll to lower a horse's head. The poll can also hold tension since there's nerves connected to it, but can be massaged out, just like humans can get massages. The mane is the thick chunk of hair that goes down a horse's neck, and the forelock is that piece of mane that goes between the horse's ears. The point of this is to protect the horse from weather and insects. Horses have eyes just like us that sit in the eye socket, but since they are prey, they are moved more towards the side of their face so they have a wider range of vision. They do have 2 blind spots though, which is directly in front of them and directly behind them. That's why they say never walk behind a horse, because they might scare you and kick you. The facial crest is the hard ridges that run on the face below the eye, and they add reinforcement to the skull for protection. The crest is the top of the neck. The muzzle is the horse's mouth, lips, nose, nostrils, and chin. Since horses cannot breathe through their mouth, their nostrils are very, very large and flexible to take in all the air. Last for my facial vocab is the chin groove, which sits directly behind the muzzle and is where the lower lip meets the upper jaw. It's sensitive and encourages horses to make contact with the bit when gentle pressure is applied. One more fun thing before we leave the face. Did you know horses' teeth never stop growing? That means you can tell the age of a horse by their teeth, but that also means horses need dentists. Let's move on to the body now. The withers is the point at the base of the neck, but it's before the back or lumbar. A fun fact about horses, since their heads move, they are actually measured at the withers, and instead of using inches or centimeters, they use something called hands, which there's 4 inches to a hand. So if I said a horse was 16 hands tall, then they would be 16 times 4 inches tall at the withers. A loin is what is in between a horse's back, but is in front of their rear end. It is directly behind where a saddle should sit. A croup is basically a horse's butt, but it does allow the power transfer from the hindquarters to move the horse forward. Some ponies even have straps that go over the croup, called a crup, to hold the saddle from sliding forward. The hindquarters is also the back of the horse, but is under the crup, as it's more the powerful area of the horse. It's where horses get all their power to jump high and turn barrels. You will also find a horse's femur here. The tail is a long piece of hair that attaches to the tailbone, and it's helpful for swishing away flies and looking pretty. Barrel is the center section of a horse, or what some would call the belly of the horse. It goes from the shoulder to the hindquarters, and it includes the back, the loin, the torso, and the rib cage. The flank is between a horse's barrel and hindquarters, and it is a small dent that you will see on most horses. It is actually where flank straps are placed on bucking stock, and flank straps are the fleece-lined strips of leather that go on a horse to encourage them to buck. Horses have chests just like us, and also like us, their chests can either be too broad or too narrow. If so, they can have inefficient strides and poor balances, which we don't want. Now it's time to move on to the legs. I believe if you're going to learn any part of horse, I would start with the legs, as the legs is where horses injure themselves most often and have the most parts that cannot be related to a human. The stifle is on the back leg of a horse, and it attaches the femur, or large bone of the hindquarters, to the large bone of the lower leg. It acts like a knee, and it pushes the leg forward. The gaskin also works to push the horse forward, but instead of being a part, it is actually the largest muscle on a horse's hind leg. It is right beneath the hindquarters and works similar to a human calf. The hock is the hinge point between a horse's middle and lower leg, and it acts like a human's ankle where it carries the horse's weight and is able to push off the ground. The cannon bone is what sits below a horse's hock or knee and acts like a human hand. There is no muscle around this area, so it is important to protect these parts with such things as splint boots or sport boots. The knee, also known as a carpus, is made of several bones joined together and is also another hinge point. All the muscles of a horse exist above the knee. The fetlock sits right below a horse's cannon bone, and it is a protruding joint that carries a horse's weight. Some people might mistake this as the ankle when that is not true. The pastern is what sits below the fetlock but above a horse's hoof. It acts as a pillow for the heel that provides cushion and support. There's also two bones in the pastern, the long and short pastern. The cornet band is located between the pastern and the hoof. It helps create a hoof wall, and that hoof wall is important for the structure of the hoof. A healthy cornet band is smooth and dry. The toe of a hoof is the tip of the hoof, and it helps provide balance, give it leverage, and support the horse's weight. Horses also have heels, just like humans do, which is located on the back of the hoof. Another interesting thing about horses is if you pick the hoof up, you'll find a V shape on their bottom, which is called a frog. It is flexible and gives horses bounce and allows them to absorb shock as they walk and run, but it is sensitive, so be careful when picking around it. Now that we took the time to learn the parts of the horse, we can go over what parts of the horse are ideal and what shape and size for each discipline. Show jumpers, for example, want their horses to have long necks since they need to stretch their neck to clear a jump. Also, show jumpers will typically ride larger horses, which means they're taller at the withers, since a taller horse can clear a higher jump easier. That doesn't stop the ponies from running around in the jumpers, though. Straight necks are also ideal for competitive horses, as they can take in more air into their trachea easier. Barrel horses are often opposite of jumpers, as they are typically shorter with shorter parts and muscles and bones. This is so they can get down and turn around a barrel much quicker. The bigger the horse is, typically the longer they take to turn. However, you need to be cautious, as shorter necks often have horses lose their balance more often, and that is the last thing you want to happen when turning around a barrel is have your horse slip out from underneath you. Continuing on with necks, horses with a fatter or less distinctive crest or top of the neck can support greater weight and usually make the best workhorses. This would be your drafts, maybe the horses that the Amish use, or your Clydesdales. Now, moving on from the neck, any horse with a deep girth is typically preferred for disciplines that require fast work over long distances, since they are able to fully expand their lungs. Disciplines that may have horses like this are endurance, and endurance typically uses Arabians, just like Mishka. Any discipline that requires a horse to have strength and collection typically has horses with strong hindquarters, as it makes it easier for them to hold themselves, collect themselves, or explode off when they need to. Most disciplines also require horses with a proper heel angle, as it is essential for balance. Any horse, no matter the discipline, with poor conformation or poor structure is more prone to injury and should be looked at in what discipline they are used in. Poor conformation is things like a horse having unequal parts or being pigeon-toed or duck feet. Well, thank you all for listening to my podcast. I really appreciate it, and I hope you learned something about parts of a horse. So next time you can communicate with your fellow riders, and they'll understand you. Thanks, and watch next time.